Donald Trump and the defense of religious freedom. Donald Trump has frequently addressed religious themes in his speeches and policies, and one of the central pillars of his administration has been the defense of religious freedom. From his presidential campaign to his years in the White House, Trump positioned himself as a staunch defender of Christian values, the rights of churches, and the protection of faith against what he saw as attempts at censorship and marginalization. Donald Trump and the defense of religious freedom. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for YouTube to notify you that a new video has already been released here. Thank you. Donald Trump has frequently addressed religious themes in his speeches and policies, and one of the central pillars of his administration has been the defense of religious freedom. From his presidential campaign to his years in the White House, Trump's commitment to religious freedom. From the beginning of his term, Trump made it clear that he would protect religious freedom in the United States and around the world. He reinforced this commitment with concrete measures, including Executive Order on Religious Freedom, 2017. Signed on the National Day of Prayer, this order strengthened the rights of churches and religious organizations to express themselves politically without fear of losing tax benefits. Repeal of the Johnson Amendment. He defended the repeal of the Johnson Amendment, which limited the political activities of churches and religious organizations, guaranteeing greater freedom for religious leaders to speak on social and political issues. Protection of religious institutions. Under his administration, the Department of Justice has sued states and local governments that have imposed restrictions deemed discriminatory against churches, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Strengthening international religious freedom. Trump was the first president to host a UN meeting on religious freedom, highlighting persecution against Christians and other religious minorities around the world himself as a staunch defender of Christian values, the rights of churches, and the protection of faith against what he saw as attempts at censorship and marginalization. Hashtag the relationship with religious leaders. Trump has maintained a strong relationship with religious leaders, especially evangelicals, conservative Catholics, and Orthodox Jews. He frequently met with pastors and bishops, listening to their concerns and implementing policies aligned with his beliefs. Appointed conservative justices to the Supreme Court, including Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, who have records of defending religious freedom. Created a coalition of faith during his campaigns, with support from great evangelical leaders such as Franklin Graham and Paula White. Showed strong support for Israel, recognizing Jerusalem as its capital and strengthening ties with the country, a move seen as a fulfillment of biblical prophecies by many Christians. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for YouTube to notify you that a new video has already been released here. Thank you. Hashtag controversies and criticism. Despite support from many religious groups, Trump has also faced criticism. Some organizations argued that his flammable rhetoric and personal behavior were inconsistent with Christian values. Progressive leaders pointed out that some of their policies, such as the separation of immigrant families at the border, contradicted principles of compassion and social justice present in the Christian faith. The focus on Christian religious groups has led to complaints that other religions, such as Islam, have not received the same attention and protection. Hashtag legacy in defense of the faith. Regardless of the controversies, Trump's impact on religious freedom is undeniable. Their efforts resulted in greater protagonism for religious groups in American politics, strengthening their voices and expanding their influence. Many of his supporters see his administration as an era of restoring faith in the public sphere, while his critics warn of the risks of a possible mixing of religion and state. Either way, his defense of religious freedom remains one of the most defining aspects of his political legacy. Support for Christians and faith. Consolidation of the evangelical base by Donald Trump. Throughout his presidency, Donald Trump sought to consolidate his support among evangelical Christians, presenting himself as a leader committed to protecting Christian values in the United States. His policies and speeches often emphasize the importance of faith in society, promoting initiatives that reinforce the presence of religion in the public sphere. His government adopted several measures that strengthened religious freedom and conservative principles, becoming a symbol of resistance against movements that sought to reduce the influence of Christianity in the country's culture and institutions. Hashtag appointment of conservative judges. One of Trump's most impactful actions for conservative Christians was the appointment of 3 judges to the U.S. Supreme Court: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. With these appointments, the Supreme Court now has a conservative majority, strengthening the pro-life vision and expanding the protection of religious freedom. These appointments had direct impacts on decisions on abortion, freedom of religious expression, and the presence of faith in public life, ensuring that Christian principles had greater support in the judicial system. Defending religious freedom. During his administration, Trump signed numerous executive orders and implemented policies to ensure that religious freedom was respected in all spheres of government. Some of the key initiatives include protection of prayer in schools. In 2020, your administration strengthened guidelines to ensure that students could pray and express their faith in public schools without fear of reprisal or censorship. Support for religious organizations. Trump lifted restrictions that prevented religious organizations from receiving federal funding, allowing churches and faith-based entities to participate in government assistance programs. Combating religious persecution. His government adopted a firm stance against the persecution of Christians around the world, imposing sanctions on countries that restricted religious freedom and promoting actions to protect Christian minorities in conflict regions. Defense of Christmas and religious symbols. Trump has also stood out in defending religious symbols and Christian traditions in the United States. He frequently criticized what he called the war on Christmas, referring to the tendency to replace Christian expressions such as Merry Christmas with more neutral greetings. During his government, he encouraged companies and institutions to maintain Christmas celebrations with their traditional religious references. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for YouTube to notify you that a new video has already been released here. Thank you. Additionally, he opposed the removal of Christian symbols from public spaces, arguing that such actions represented an attempt to erase the country's Christian identity. His support of religious leaders and defense of free speech for churches and pastors solidified his image as a defender of the Christian faith. Hashtag support for Israel and biblical prophecy. Another key point for many conservative Christians was Trump's strong support for Israel. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moved the U.S. Embassy to the city, a historic gesture that was seen by many evangelicals as the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. His commitment to strengthening relations between the United States and Israel has generated great support among Christians who believe in the spiritual importance of this alliance. The impact of his Christian legacy. Even after his presidency ends, Trump's influence among Christians remains strong. His commitment to conservative values, his defense of religious freedom, and his resistance against cultural forces that seek to reduce the influence of Christianity still resonate with millions of Americans. For many, he became a symbol of the fight against the secularization of society and in favor of preserving faith in public life. Although his approach has been controversial for some, it is undeniable that Trump has managed to mobilize and consolidate a Christian base that sees him as one of the greatest defenders of the faith in modern American politics. His legacy remains a point of reference for many who desire a government that protects and promotes Christian values in the United States and around the world. Religious freedom on the international scene. Religious freedom is a fundamental human right, recognized internationally by documents such as the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. However, this freedom continues to be challenged in many parts of the world, where authoritarian governments, ethnic conflicts, and religious extremism result in severe persecution and restrictions. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for YouTube to notify you that a new video has already been released here. Thank you. Hashtag the role of the United States in promoting religious freedom. The United States has historically positioned itself as a leading defender of religious freedom on the global stage. During Donald Trump's administration, this emphasis was reinforced by several international policies and initiatives. Among them, the following stand out. Hashtag sanctions against persecuting regimes. The Trump administration has adopted economic sanctions and diplomatic restrictions against countries known for violating religious freedom. Among the main targets of these sanctions were China. Sanctions were imposed due to repression against Muslim Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region, where more than 1 million people have been detained in re-education camps. Iran. Measures were taken against the Iranian government for persecuting Christian converts and other religious minorities. North Korea. Recognized as one of the most repressive countries in the world in terms of religious freedom, it was the target of sanctions for its policy of severe repression against Christians and religious dissidents. Hashtag Ministerial Summit for Religious Freedom. In 2018 and 2019, the U.S. Department of State hosted the Religious Freedom Ministerial Summit, bringing together world leaders, human rights advocates, and representatives of religious communities to discuss global strategies to protect freedom of belief. Recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Although this measure was a political decision, it also had a strong religious impact. The recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital was widely supported by evangelical Christians who see Israel as central to biblical prophecy and a strategic ally of the United States. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like for YouTube to notify you that a new video has already been released here. Thank you. Hashtag Global Challenges to Religious Freedom. Despite the efforts of some nations, religious freedom still faces significant challenges around the world. Some of the main threats include hashtag persecution in authoritarian regimes. China. In addition to the Uyghurs, the Chinese government has repressed unregistered Christian churches and other religious communities, monitoring and punishing practices considered subversive to the communist regime. Religious minorities face extreme persecution, with the risk of death due to apostasy. Pakistan. The blasphemy law has been used to persecute religious minorities, especially Christians and Shia Muslims. Hashtag growth of religious extremism. Middle East and Africa. Terrorist groups such as the Islamic State, ISIS, and Boko Haram continue to carry out attacks against Christians, Yazidis, and Muslims of different sects. India ***. The rise of Hindu nationalism has resulted in violence against Muslim and Christian minorities, with laws restricting religious conversions. Hashtag threats to religious freedom in the West. Even in democratic countries, challenges arise regarding religious freedom, including conflicts between religious freedom and civil rights. In some Western countries, issues involving freedom of belief versus LGBTQI+ rights and gender equality generate debates about the limits of this right. Radical secularism. In some European nations, restrictions on religious symbols in public spaces raise hashtag conclusion. Religious freedom remains one of the fundamental pillars of human rights, but it faces increasing challenges in different parts of the world. While some nations seek to promote it through policies and sanctions, reality shows that there is still much to be done to ensure that individuals can express their faith without fear of persecution. The debate over how to balance religious freedom with other fundamental rights continues to be a central issue in global politics. About the marginalization of certain religions.